In 2024, scientists aimed a laser at the Amazon jungle in Ecuador and found over 6,000 ancient structures hidden beneath the trees. Platforms, plazas, roads wider than modern highways, and a civilization at least 2,500 years old that no textbook had ever mentioned. The journal Science published the findings on January 11, 2024, and the lead researcher, a French archaeologist named Stéphen Rostain, had been searching for exactly this proof for 30 years. For 3 decades, the scientific establishment told him he was wasting his career. They said the Amazon could never have supported complex societies. They told him to study somewhere else, anywhere else, because there was nothing to find beneath that canopy. They were wrong, and the laser proved it. What it revealed beneath the canopy of the Upano Valley in Ecuador has been called a complete revolution in our understanding of the Amazon. But this story is not just about what the laser found. It is about why it took so long to look in the first place. Because the Amazon's lost cities were not only hidden by the jungle, they were hidden by the very scientists who were supposed to be finding them. Stéphen Rostain was born in 1962 in the coastal city of Brest in Brittany, France. He studied archaeology at Paris, won Panthéon-Sorbonne, and from the very beginning of his career, he made a choice that baffled his colleagues. While everyone else chased prestigious excavations at famous sites in Egypt, Greece, and the ancient Near East, Rostain went to the Amazon rainforest. He arrived in French Guiana in 1985 and spent nearly a decade there until 1994, working as an archaeologist in dense coastal jungle that most of his peers would never visit. He would later be described as the first French archaeologist to dedicate his entire career to the Amazonian rainforest. And there, in the green silence of the northeast of South America, he did something nobody expected. He rented ultralight aircraft, tiny open cockpit planes barely larger than a hang glider with an engine bolted on, and flew low over the landscape searching for patterns invisible from the ground. It was dangerous, unconventional, and exactly the kind of creative fieldwork that gets ignored by tenure committees. What he spotted from those cockpits changed his life. Thousands of pre-Columbian raised agricultural fields stretched across the lowlands, not natural formations, not random terrain features. Engineered landscapes shaped by human hands on an enormous scale, designed to grow food, manage water flow, and support large populations that the textbook said never existed. But when Rostain brought his findings back to the academic world, something strange happened. Instead of excitement, he got hostility. When he told colleagues that mounds he had identified in French Guiana were built by indigenous peoples, they pushed back hard. Those had to be natural formations, they insisted. Or maybe they were built by colonial prisoners or enslaved laborers. The idea that Amazonian indigenous people had the knowledge, the organization, and the ambition to build them was treated as absurd. And this is where Rostain's personal story collides with a much bigger problem. The resistance he faced was not random skepticism. It had a name, a source, and an institutional address. Betty Jane Meggers was a research anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of Natural History in Washington, D.C. In 1971, she published a book called Amazonia: Man and Culture in a Counterfeit Paradise. Her argument was simple. The Amazon's soils were too poor, the environment too hostile, the jungle too unforgiving for anything beyond small nomadic tribes. The vast interior of the forest was a biological dead zone for civilization. Only narrow river floodplains could sustain anything approaching a settled population. Meggers was not a fringe figure. She was one of the most respected voices in American anthropology. Her thesis landed at exactly the right cultural moment, when the environmental movement was painting tropical forests as fragile ecosystems that humans could only damage, never build, within. Her environmental determinism became orthodoxy in universities and research institutions across the Western world. From the 1970s through the 2000s, if you wanted to study complex societies in the Amazon, you were effectively told not to bother. The forest could not have supported them. The soils were too thin. The environment too punishing. Case closed. Funding dried up. Academic careers were built on other continents. And an entire generation of potential discoveries was lost to 3 decades of enforced institutional blindness. That orthodoxy landed on Rostain like a concrete wall. He heard the same refrain from mentors, from hiring committees, from grant review panels, from peers who should have known better. No one is interested in the archaeology of the Amazon. You will never get a job. The message was consistent, and it was brutal. Stop looking. There is nothing to find. But Rostain had seen the evidence from the cockpit of those ultralights. Straight lines do not occur in nature. Rectangular grids do not form by accident. And no amount of institutional pressure could make him unsee what his own eyes had shown him. So he kept going. In 1996, he moved to Ecuador, where he would serve as co-director of the Sangay Upano archaeological project for the next 5 years. The Upano Valley sits in the eastern foothills of the Andes, a lush green corridor of dense tropical vegetation overshadowed by the Sangay volcano, one of the most active volcanoes on Earth. The constant eruptions deposit fresh volcanic ash across the valley floor, creating soil so fertile that local farmers still pull 3 maize harvests per year from the same fields. Rostain first entered the valley in 1995 and did something nobody else with his credentials was willing to do. He surveyed it on foot. Picture the conditions. Dense tropical vegetation choking every sightline. Visibility limited to a few meters in the undergrowth. Machetes required just to move forward. Mud-swallowing boots at every step. And somewhere beneath all of that green chaos, the faint suggestion of something ancient. Low rectangular rises that might be platforms. Shallow depressions that might be plazas. The ghost of an engineered landscape that the textbooks insisted could not exist. He found hundreds of earthen mounds. Hundreds. Enough to fill notebooks with maps and measurements and questions that would consume the next 3 decades of his life. But from the ground through walls of vegetation, the full picture was impossible to see. He was trying to map a lost civilization by looking through a keyhole. For the next 20 years, Rostain built his case 1 mound at a time. He became director of research at the French National Center for Scientific Research, based at the Laboratoire Archaeology des Amériques in Paris. He authored or co-authored more than 450 publications, including roughly 45 books. He spent over 40 years working in a part of the world that most archaeologists treated as a professional dead end. And through all of it, he carried the conviction that something vast lay hidden in the Upano Valley, waiting for a technology that could see through the canopy and prove what the academic world refused to consider. And here is where the story of one stubborn archaeologist connects to the darkest chapter in human history. Because the reason the Amazon appeared empty was not that humans had never been there. It was that they had been systematically erased. When European colonizers reached the Americas, beginning in the late 1400s, they carried diseases that indigenous populations had never encountered. Smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus. The death toll defies comprehension. Scholarly estimates published by William Denevan show the population of the entire Western Hemisphere collapsed from approximately 54 million people in 1492 to roughly 5.5 million by 1650, an 89% reduction in just over 150 years. By 1750, only about 16 million people inhabited the hemisphere. In the Amazon basin alone, conservative estimates now place the pre-contact population at 6 to 10 million, with some researchers suggesting even higher numbers. Eduardo Neves, a professor of archaeology at the University of São Paulo, has stated that a conservative figure puts the Amazon's pre-Columbian population at 6 to 9 million people, with the dominant view today suggesting as many as 10 million. Up to 95% of them were dead within a few generations of European contact. And when millions of people vanish from a tropical landscape, the jungle does not wait. It moves in fast. Secondary growth swallows cities whole. Roads disappear under root systems. Platforms built from earth, not stone, become indistinguishable from natural terrain beneath centuries of leaf litter and new canopy. Stone pyramids in Egypt survive millennia because rock resists the elements. But earthen structures in a tropical rainforest become invisible the moment the jungle reclaims them. A 2-meter-high platform covered by a few decades of growth looks like nothing more than a gentle rise in the forest floor. You could walk across it without a second thought. The civilizations of the Amazon were not primitive failures. They were erased by the greatest demographic catastrophe in recorded history. And then the forest covered the evidence so thoroughly that the next wave of Europeans assumed the wilderness had always been there. We actually had an eyewitness who saw the Amazon before that erasure was complete. In 1541, a Spanish friar named Gaspar de Carvajal traveled with Francisco de Orellana's expedition down the length of the Amazon River and kept a detailed journal of everything they encountered along the way. What he described was a revelation. Densely populated cities stretching for miles along the riverbanks without interruption. Organized resistance from large indigenous armies capable of fielding hundreds of warriors in canoes. Sophisticated pottery. Agricultural abundance. So many people lining the banks that, as Carvajal wrote, if you dropped a pin from the sky, it would land on the head of an Indian. For centuries, every historian who read that journal dismissed Carvajal as a fantasist, an exaggerator inflating his accounts to impress the Spanish crown. His descriptions were treated as obvious fiction because they contradicted the prevailing view that the Amazon could not possibly support such populations. The irony is devastating. The eyewitness was telling the truth all along. The scientists who came centuries later, the ones who mocked Carvajal's accounts, were the ones operating on a false assumption because they arrived after the population had been killed and the forest had swallowed the proof. William Denevan, a geography professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, understood this contradiction before almost anyone else in his field. In 1963, flying over Bolivia's Llanos de Mojos in a DC-3 aircraft, he looked out the window and spotted enormous geometric earthworks below, straight lines cutting across the savanna, raised platforms standing above the floodplain, canal networks stretching toward the horizon. "I am going berserk in this little airplane," he later recalled. "I knew these things were not natural. You just do not have that kind of straight line in nature." His doctoral dissertation focused specifically on the Llanos de Mojos, the exact region where LiDAR would later reveal massive urban centers. He was ahead of the evidence by more than half a century. In 1992, Denevan published a landmark paper in the Annals of the Association of American Geographers called The Pristine Myth, The Landscape of the Americas in 1492. His central argument struck at the very foundation of Western assumptions about the New World. The myth persists, he wrote, that in 1492, the Americas were a sparsely populated wilderness, but there was substantial evidence that the landscape of the early 16th century was a humanized landscape almost everywhere. Not untouched wilderness, not virgin forest. A managed environment shaped by thousands of years of deliberate human intervention that had been disguised as nature by the catastrophic loss of the people who maintained it. But proving it required technology that did not exist in Denovan's time, or in Rostain's early career. The tool that would finally crack the Amazon open was still decades away. That tool was LiDAR. And to grasp what it meant for this story, forget the technical details for a moment and consider the numbers. At the ancient Maya city of Caracol in Belize, a team of archaeologists spent 20 years surveying 9 square kilometers of jungle on foot. LiDAR scanned 200 square kilometers of that same jungle in 6 days. At El Zotes in Guatemala, Thomas Garrison's team from the University of Texas at Austin spent 8 years meticulously mapping less than 1 square mile. There was a defensive wall 30 feet high that they had walked within 150 feet of without ever seeing it. In Bolivia, archaeologist Heiko Prumers calculated that traditional methods would have required 400 years of excavation to uncover what LiDAR revealed in days. 400 years. That is not a metaphor. That is a calculation. Here is how it works. An aircraft flies over a target area carrying a laser scanner that fires hundreds of thousands of infrared pulses per second toward the ground. Modern systems like the Teledyne Optech Titan fire at combined rates of 900,000 pulses per second. Nearly 1 million invisible beams strike the landscape every single second. Most of those pulses bounce off the treetops, mapping the canopy surface as the first return signal. But a percentage find tiny gaps between leaves and branches. Those pulses slip through and keep traveling downward. Some hit lower branches, some hit undergrowth, and some of them, the ones archaeologists care about most, travel etourse all the way through to the bare ground itself. Those ground-hitting returns are called last return signals. Collect millions of them across a survey area, use classification algorithms to strip away every layer of vegetation data. And what emerges is a digital terrain model. A bare earth map at half-meter resolution. Features as shallow as 20 centimeters, the height of a small curb, become starkly visible from above. Mounds, ditches, roads, platforms, drainage channels. Structures that a person walking through the jungle could step over without a second thought suddenly appear in sharp geometric relief on the screen, as if someone had peeled the forest off the earth like a green blanket and revealed every scar that human hands had pressed into the soil thousands of years ago. In 2015, a private Russian company was commissioned by Ecuador's National Institute of Cultural Heritage to fly a LiDAR-equipped aircraft over approximately 600 square kilometers of the Upano Valley, bouncing millions of laser pulses off the ground below, while the dense tropical canopy above remained completely undisturbed. The raw data sat in institutional archives for 6 years, waiting for someone who knew what to do with it. Then, in 2021, Stéphen Rostain's team finally gained access to the dataset. They processed the scans using Relief Visualization Toolbox, Saga, and QGIS software, stripping away the canopy layer by layer. And what appeared on their screens in Paris was beyond anything Rostain had allowed himself to imagine in 3 decades of fieldwork. More than 6,000 rectangular earthen platforms spread across approximately 300 square kilometers of the valley's southern half. Thousands of structures where Rostain had found only hundreds. The LiDAR revealed features only 1 meter high. Agricultural furrows just 20 centimeters deep. Some structures were so subtle that a person standing directly on top of one would never know. All of it invisible from the ground, all starkly geometric and unmistakably human from above. His reaction still carries the raw weight of 30 years of vindication. 30 years later, he realized there were not hundreds of mounds, but thousands of mounds. Each processing pass revealed more, and he said each day it was like Christmas with a new gift. As the full scale of what lay before him overwhelmed even decades of scientific discipline, he described it as a lost valley of cities and called it incredible. The standard platforms measured roughly 20 by 10 meters, standing 2 to 3 meters high. Monumental structures dwarfed those dimensions. At the Quilomope site, one complex stretched 140 meters by 40 meters. Some ceremonial platforms reached 10 meters in height. The platforms were typically arranged in clusters of 3 or 6 around a low square plaza, each cluster anchored by a central platform. The survey identified 15 distinct settlement sites across the valley, 5 large and 10 smaller, including Sangay, Quilomope, Cunguintz, Copueno, and Nigiamanch. The numbers that followed put the Upano Valley into ancient history's upper tier. The core area of Quilomope alone is comparable in size to the Giza Plateau, the site of Egypt's Great Pyramids. Sangay packed more than 100 platforms per square kilometer, across a footprint the size of Central Park in Manhattan. But the platforms were only part of the picture. What emerged next from the data transformed this from a collection of settlement sites into proof of a fully integrated civilization. Connecting all 15 settlements was a road system that extended over tens of kilometers across the landscape. The longest road ran at least 25 kilometers from end to end, and it may have continued even farther beyond the survey boundary. These were not narrow jungle trails worn through undergrowth by foot traffic. They were engineered thoroughfares up to 10 to 15 meters across, wider than a 2-lane road, and dug 2 to 5 meters deep into the earth. They were bordered by tall curbs made from piled soil, and they cut through the landscape in perfectly straight lines, crossing ravines, traversing ridgelines, plowing through whatever the terrain threw at them, with, as the researchers noted, no regard for natural relief. Think about what that means. These builders did not route their roads around obstacles the way a practical engineer would. They drove them straight through, over hills, across gullies, through anything in the way. That decision required an immense organized labor force, and it served a purpose beyond getting from point A to point B. The extraordinary width, the deliberate depth, the absolute straightness through difficult terrain all pointed to symbolic or ceremonial significance layered on top of the transportation function. These were statements of power and identity carved into the earth by a society that wanted the landscape itself to reflect its ambitions. Antoine Dorisso, the postdoctoral researcher who led the LiDAR analysis, had cut his teeth processing data from the ancient Maya site of Nachtun in Guatemala. He knew exactly what he was seeing. He said the road network is very sophisticated. It extends over a vast distance. Everything is connected. Smaller streets and pathways linked neighborhoods within each site, creating a layered grid that functioned at every scale, from local to regional. No settlement existed in isolation. Every platform, every cluster, every community was woven into a single integrated network. Between the settlements and the roads, the LiDAR exposed organized agriculture on a scale that demolished Megger's thesis completely. Dense rectangular fields stretched across the valley floor. Hillside terraces were carved into slopes to prevent erosion and capture rainfall. A grid-like drainage system of shallow ditches fed into progressively deeper canals, all engineered to manage the waterlogged volcanic soil and channel excess water away from cultivated land. Excavations identified a diverse crop base that included maize, manioc or cassava, sweet potato, beans, various fruits, and medicinal plants. The Sangay volcano had been depositing layers of fresh volcanic ash across these fields for centuries, and the result was some of the richest agricultural land found anywhere in South America. 3 full harvests of maize in a single year came from land that Megger's theory said could not even feed a village. Now, if you have made it this far, you clearly care about what is actually buried beneath the world's jungles. We cover discoveries like this every week, before most channels even know the research exists. Like and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. Because what the LiDAR found in Bolivia makes Ecuador look like a warm-up. The society that built the Upano Valley structures was not a cluster of struggling villages. It was a planned, engineered, interconnected civilization. And its age made the discovery even more extraordinary. Archaeological excavations drawing on approximately 70 radiocarbon dates place the first human occupation of the Upano Valley at around 700 BCE, with organized mound construction starting around 500 BCE. The civilization endured for roughly 1,000 years, from about 500 BCE to somewhere between 300 and 600 CE. Researchers identified two distinct cultural phases within that millennium-long span: the earlier Quilomope culture and the later Upano culture, each leaving its mark on the same landscape. After the original builders abandoned the valley, possibly around 300 to 600 CE for reasons that remain unclear, a different group called the Huapula culture moved in around 800 CE and reoccupied the same platforms, fields, and roads their predecessors had built centuries earlier. The roads still worked. The drainage still functioned. The agricultural terraces still held the hillsides in place. The infrastructure was so well engineered that a completely different people could move back in and use it generations later without modification. Co-author Antoine Dorisson estimated the peak population at between 15,000 and 30,000 people, a number he compared to Roman-era London. "It changes the way we see Amazonian cultures," he said. "Most people picture small groups, probably naked, living in huts and clearing land. This shows ancient people lived in complicated urban societies." But it was the timeline that detonated like a bomb in the archaeological world. These settlements are at least 2,500 years old, more than 1,000 years older than any complex society previously documented anywhere in the Amazon basin. They predate Bolivia's Casarabe culture by a full millennium. The paper's abstract drew the comparison explicitly, stating that such extensive early development in the upper Amazon is comparable to similar Maya urban systems recently highlighted in Mexico and Guatemala. José Iriarte, a professor of archaeology at the University of Exeter, who was not involved in the study, called the findings completely unprecedented in Amazonia and in Andean prehistory. Thomas Garrison at the University of Texas at Austin, a respected LiDAR specialist who had worked extensively with the technology in Guatemala's Maya lowlands, offered measured caution, noting it was too early to compare the Upano cities directly to the classic Maya or Teotihuacan, which were more complex and more extensive. But even that careful qualification acknowledged something that would have been unthinkable just a decade earlier. The Amazon was now being discussed in the same sentence as the great civilizations of Mesoamerica and the Andes. The conversation had changed permanently. And Stéphen Rostain himself, the man who had carried this conviction through 30 years of institutional rejection, who had heard, "You will never get a job," more times than he could count, who had been told that mounds he found with his own hands were natural formations or the work of colonial prisoners, coined the term that defined the discovery. For that reason, I call this Garden Cities. It is a complete revolution in our paradigm about the Amazon. A complete revolution in our paradigm. Those words carry extraordinary weight coming from a scientist with over 450 peer-reviewed publications and roughly 45 books to his name. He was not suggesting a minor adjustment to the scholarly record. He was not proposing a footnote revision. He was announcing the demolition of the foundation on which 3 decades of Amazonian scholarship had been constructed. Every textbook that called the Amazon a pristine wilderness. Every museum exhibit that depicted the forest as untouched by civilization. Every grant application that was rejected because the orthodoxy said there was nothing to find. All of it overturned by a laser and a man who refused to quit. For 3 decades, Megger's orthodoxy told the world the Amazon was incapable of complexity. Funding was denied to researchers who disagreed, and careers were steered toward safer continents. Indigenous oral histories describing great cities and vast populations were dismissed as legends and fairy tales, the naive stories of people who did not understand their own past. The 16th century eyewitness accounts of Gaspar de Carvajal, a man who had actually traveled the Amazon while its civilizations were still alive, were treated as obvious fiction. The establishment did not just fail to find these civilizations. It actively prevented anyone from looking for them. And now the laser had spoken. The Amazon was never a pristine wilderness. It was a managed landscape, an engineered garden, a network of urban centers connected by roads wider than modern highways, and surrounded by farms that produced 3 harvests a year from volcanic soil. What Europeans later called untouched jungle was simply nature doing what it does best, reclaiming an abandoned garden after 95% of the gardeners were killed by foreign diseases. The wilderness was not ancient. It was barely 500 years old. Before that, it was a civilization. Christopher Fisher, an archaeologist at Colorado State University, who wrote the accompanying commentary in the journal Nature, captured the paradigm shift with a single devastating sentence. We see the Amazon today as a pristine tropical forest, but in reality, it is an abandoned garden. An abandoned garden. 5 words that rewrite the story of an entire continent. And here is the thing about paradigm shifts. Once the first crack appears, the evidence starts flooding through. The updates have not stopped coming since that January 2024 publication. A 2025 follow-up study published in Nature Communications, drawing on continued analysis of the same LiDAR data plus additional processing, pushed the Upano Valley structure count past 7,000 platforms. 7,000, and the researchers said they were still finding more with each pass through the data. A separate 2025 paper by Bush and McMichael provided a 2,700-year paleoecological record for the valley, demonstrating that the modern forests covering these sites have only existed in their current form for about 200 years. The ancient forest growing over the Upano Valley settlements is younger than the United States Constitution. In December 2025, a new LiDAR survey of the Choco Andino region in Ecuador, conducted by the Instituto Metropolitano de Patrimonio, uncovered more than 200 additional mounds and over 100 terraces across just 2% of a 280,000-hectare area. 2% of the survey zone yielded a 5-fold increase over everything previously documented there. Imagine what the other 98% contains. And in Rondônia, Brazil, archaeologist Carlos Zimpel Neto at the Federal University of Rondônia used LiDAR to rediscover a lost 18th century Portuguese colony near the Príncipe da Beira fortress, alongside pre-Columbian circular geoglyphs with ceramics dating between 1,200 and 2,000 years old. Every single time someone points a laser at the Amazon, something new emerges. The most comprehensive basin-wide study ever conducted confirmed the scale of what we are still missing. Led by Vinicius Peripato at Brazil's National Institute for Space Research, with a team of more than 200 researchers from 24 countries drawing on over 80 years of accumulated data, the study found that only 0.08% of the Amazon has been surveyed with LiDAR. Less than 0.1% of a forest that covers 5.5 million square kilometers has been surveyed. Based on predictive modeling that combined 937 known earthwork sites with topographical and ecological data from 1,676 forest plots, they estimated between 10,000 and 24,000 pre-Columbian earthworks remain hidden beneath the canopy. The known sites may represent no more than 9% of what actually exists. Peripato captured the challenge with appropriate scientific honesty, saying the Amazon forest is continental in scale. He added that even if we had generous budgets, it would take years and an extensive workforce to survey the river basin from the ground up. Eduardo Neves at the University of São Paulo framed what is at stake with the urgency it deserves. Eduardo Neves said the forests are our pyramids, and like pyramids, they tell stories of civilizations that deserve to be remembered. 91% of the Amazon's pre-Columbian earthworks have never been seen by modern eyes. They are down there right now, beneath root systems and leaf litter and centuries of regrowth, waiting for someone to point a laser at them. But the Upano Valley, as extraordinary as it is, was not even the most dramatic LiDAR discovery to come out of the Amazon. Roughly 1,200 kilometers to the southeast, deep in the seasonally flooded savannas of Bolivia's BNI department, another team of researchers had already aimed their lasers at a landscape that locals had always known was strange. The mounds were too regular, the canals too straight, the raised causeways too deliberate. What the LiDAR revealed makes the Upano Valley look almost modest by comparison. They found pyramids, not stone pyramids like the ones in Egypt or Mexico, but conical earthen pyramids rising 22 meters above the surrounding savanna, roughly the height of a 7-story building, built entirely from soil, compacted and shaped by thousands of hands over generations. They found a primary urban center called Kotoka, surrounded by 3 concentric rings of defensive moats and ramparts, with causeways radiating outward like the spokes of a wheel connecting it to a network of smaller settlements across the landscape. The LiDAR revealed a 4-tier urban hierarchy controlling 500 square kilometers of territory. Primary centers with massive civic architecture, secondary centers with their own ceremonial platforms, smaller enclosures, minimal activity sites, a structured political geography that suggests centralized authority, controlled access, and a level of social organization that nobody believed was possible in the Amazon. And the construction numbers tell the story better than any interpretation. Building the core of Kotoka alone required moving approximately 570,000 cubic meters of earth. To put that in perspective, that is 10 times the volume excavated for the Akapana Pyramid at Tiwanaku, one of the single greatest monuments in all of Andean history. 10 times. The lead archaeologist Heiko Prumer at the German Archaeological Institute estimated it would have taken 400 years of conventional excavation to reveal what the laser exposed in a matter of days. He has been working in this region for over 20 years, and when the LiDAR data came in, he said something that captures the entire arc of this story. The first results were excellent and showed how effective the technology was even in dense rainforest. And then he made a prediction. I'm sure that in the next 10 or 20 years we will see a lot of these cities, and some even bigger than the ones we are presenting in our paper. Bigger, even bigger, in a forest where 91% of the earthworks have never been seen. And just like the Upano Valley, nobody outside the jungle knew any of this existed. Not until the laser stripped the canopy bare and forced the world to confront what had been hidden beneath its feet for centuries. That story, the full and unbelievable story of Bolivia's lost pyramids and the civilization that built them, is what comes next. Like and subscribe right now, and we will see you in part 2.